Strategy games have been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. But there's one genre that never got the recognition it truly deserves: real-time tactics. This is the story of its fight for survival.
Come on over. Just leave it to me.
Yeah.
Alarm! Alarm!
We're listening, sir. I'm going.
I cannot overstate how ingrained these sound effects, music and voice lines are in my memory. And I know for a fact there are plenty of people like me out there, especially here in Europe. But it pains me to see how little online discourse there is about this genre. So, it's time to do my part. Welcome to my deep dive into real-time tactics.
Have a seat.
In 1996, the Spanish Pérez Dulcet brothers founded a game development company, Pyro Studios. Their goal was to create a game on a relatively modest budget of around $1 million, something that could stand out in the then booming strategy game market. They aimed to develop a title that was both original and competitive. Ignacio Pérez, a passionate fan of World War II movies and war games, used that as inspiration for their first project, Commandos Behind Enemy Lines. The team got to work, drawing inspiration from games like Cannon Fodder, where you could command a group of soldiers in real time. But unlike Cannon Fodder, where soldiers were expendable, Commandos would go in the opposite direction. In this game, every unit counts. A perhaps more unusual source of inspiration was the Lost Vikings. What they took from that game was the idea that each character should have unique abilities, and that cooperation between them was essential to completing a level. The goal was to blend strategy, puzzle solving and light RPG elements into a cohesive experience. There were challenges early on, one being how to present the characters. The team didn't want generic cardboard cutouts. They aimed to create a small, intimate squad that players could connect with. One of the biggest design debates centered on commando mortality. Should players be allowed to resurrect dead characters in later missions, or should a loss mean restarting the mission entirely? Both options had merit, but ultimately they chose the harsher path. It fit the game's core philosophy. Each commando was a vital, specialized asset. Lose one and the mission would fall apart. Another major challenge was delivering high-quality visuals that authentically captured World War II settings. To achieve this, Pyro Studios developed a custom engine that moved away from the standard tile-based systems of the era. While this resulted in rich, visually impressive maps, it also meant each mission had to be painstakingly crafted by hand, without the help of a mission editor, making the process both time-consuming and labor-intensive. But after 18 grueling months, the team finally completed the game and shipped it worldwide. Commandos Behind Enemy Lines topped the PC gaming charts, and by 2000 it had sold over 1.5 million units. Today, that number is impressive for any debut game, but 25 years ago it was nothing short of amazing. The game was the first of its kind, but what distinguishes it from other games in the strategy genre? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's take a look at the core gameplay pillars of the real-time tactics genre.
Unique, ingeniously designed missions and a gameplay that combines clever strategy and furious action lead to a new approach in strategy games: real-time tactics.
Real-time tactics is a niche offshoot of the more well-known real-time strategy genre. And because it's so niche, its definition has always been a little fuzzy. At its core, RTT strips away some of the traditional RTS elements, things like resource gathering and base building, and instead focuses on controlling individual units and mastering tactics. But even with that definition, you'd still be including games like the Total War series, at least the battle segments. The games I'm talking about go a step further. They follow a much more specific set of design rules. For a long time though, there wasn't really a name to set them apart from the broader RTT category. That changed in 2022, when developer Mimimi Games coined the term stealth strategy. With that, these games finally had a name of their own. We'll come back to Mimimi in a bit. Now, let's take a moment to define these stealth strategy titles. And what better way to do that than by looking at the earliest games in the genre's lifespan, Commandos Behind Enemy Lines and its expansion Beyond the Call of Duty. There are 6 core design principles that I feel most real-time tactics or stealth strategy games tend to follow. 1. They're played in real time. where strategy is only half the battle. The rest is execution. 2. They use a bird's eye view, sometimes isometric, sometimes not, but always with a perspective that lets you survey the battlefield and plan routes and timing precisely. 3. You control a small team of characters, each with unique abilities, tools or equipment. Success depends on understanding how these abilities complement one another. 4. Enemies follow strict patrol routes or stand guard at specific spots. This creates predictable patterns players can observe, learn and exploit, making the game feel almost like a puzzle. 5. Stealth is the dominant gameplay style. This genre isn't about running in guns blazing. It's possible, but rarely effective. It's about avoiding detection, taking out enemies silently and leaving no trace. And 6. Enemy vision cones can be visualized, showing exactly where guards are looking, allowing players to navigate the environment strategically. Additionally, while not strictly necessary, quick saving and quick loading is a staple in the genre. These games are notoriously difficult and are built around experimentation, trial and error and perfect execution. Being able to quickly try something and reload if it doesn't work out is a godsend. These design principles became the foundation that most RTT games would follow, and what an impressive first outing it was for Pyro Studios. Thinking up a plan and executing it flawlessly felt amazing, and each commando was memorable thanks to their unique abilities and voice lines. But as strong as Commandos and its expansion were, the experience was still a bit unrefined. Understandable for a studio's first go. That's where the next 2 games come in. While Pyro Studios was hard at work on the highly anticipated sequel to Commandos, German developer Spellbound Entertainment released their own take on the Commandos-like formula. Desperados wanted Dead or Alive. It delivered one of the tightest and most refined experiences in the real-time tactics genre. What set Desperados apart was its strong storytelling, cinematic flair, and a refreshingly unique Wild West setting. The game featured beautifully rendered 3D cutscenes that really brought the characters and story to life. They look fantastic, especially for a game from 2001. And man, these characters are memorable, with perfect voice acting and a diverse range of skills and personalities.
Wow, that was short and real sweet.
Looks like you found Kate.
Yep. Seems she's been dealing crooked again.
The mission design was equally impressive. With a wide variety of maps that weren't just visually distinct, they actively shaped how you played. Environmental factors had real gameplay impact. Night maps had limited visibility, rain could disable fuses, and sometimes explosions could be masked by ambient noise. The levels were also packed with interactive objects and clever design touches that made every mission feel dynamic and alive. It was also the first game in the genre to introduce the occasional indoor environments, adding a whole new layer to the already insanely detailed maps. Seriously, these maps are absolutely beautiful. On top of that, Desperados introduced a major quality of life feature, the ability to queue up commands and execute them all with a single button press. Super useful for pulling off those synchronized multi-character plays. The AI was smarter,
Having trouble?
the systems deeper,
No, it's okay.
and the result was a game that felt like a true evolution of the RTT formula. And honestly, if I could only play one game from the entire genre, this would be my game of choice.
Who's there?
Well, I did.
Hands off the lady.
That kind of innovation didn't go unnoticed, especially by the team at Pyro Studios, who were proud to see the genre they defined being pushed forward. But they weren't done yet. On September 20th, 2001, just 5 months after Desperados, they released Commandos 2: Men of Courage. Ask any fan of the real-time tactics genre what their favorite game is, and there's a good chance they'll name this one, and for good reason. It was built on a completely new engine that allowed for gigantic, diverse maps. On top of that, they introduced a rotating camera, making it much easier to get your bearings. While Desperados occasionally featured indoor sections, Commandos went a step further, with fully 3D modeled interiors on every map, adding a whole new layer of complexity. Another major innovation was that all the Commandos could perform basic actions like driving vehicles, swimming, using enemy weapons, knocking out, tying up and carrying enemies, and much more. While some might argue that this diminishes the puzzle nature of the genre, which I somewhat agree with, there's no denying that it opened up a huge number of possibilities in how to approach each mission. Beyond gameplay, one area where Pyro Studios absolutely peaked in my opinion was the presentation. The maps were stunning, the animations were smooth as butter, the portrait animations added so much character, and the voice lines and sound effects were spot on.
Leave it to me.
But perhaps the greatest contribution this game made, one that I'll be forever grateful for, is its soundtrack by Matteo Pasquale. There's a reason why half of this video uses music from Commandos 2. It's absolutely flawless in my opinion. Alright, that's enough biased praise from me. With these two releases, the genre had reached its peak. Commandos 2 became the top-selling PC game in Europe in 2001 and ranked number 3 worldwide. But why the title of this video? Well, this would also be one of the last truly outstanding games in the genre for a long time. That's not to say there weren't any quality follow-ups though. Both Spellbound and Pyro returned with another RTT title. Robin Hood, The Legend of Sherwood in 2002 and Commandos 3 Destination Berlin in 2003. Robin Hood introduced some solid new ideas, like base management, recruit training and day and night mission variants. But with fewer, slightly repetitive maps and a more action-oriented, forgiving design, it leaned away from the genre's hardcore tactical roots, signaling the start of a slow shift in direction. Commandos 3 was also a good game, much like Robin Hood. It was built on the same strong foundation as the earlier entries in the series, adding beautiful 3D renditions of the main heroes, highly detailed environments, and another godlike soundtrack by Matteo. But it was still a step down from its predecessors. The game suffered from unmappable hotkeys, a max resolution of 800 by 600, time limits on certain maps, an over-reliance on scripted action sequences, a shorter campaign, and a clunkier interface. As I said, it was still a good game, but the cracks were beginning to show. That same year, Spellbound released their next game, Chicago 1930. In it, you could play as either the gangsters or the FBI during the Prohibition era. Quite a cool premise. However, the game was clearly a downgrade from their previous work, which isn't surprising given the short 1-year development time and a seemingly low budget. With only a few maps, a small cast of characters and an even weaker emphasis on stealth, it faded into obscurity quickly. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I absolutely love pre-rendered graphics. All of the games I've mentioned so far use this technique. Essentially, the map is either modeled or painted and rendered as a flat image. Afterward, collision and interactions are added, along with units, which can be in the form of sprites or actual 3D models. This technique allows for highly detailed environments without straining the hardware too much. I've always adored this style, but by 2003 many people started to grow tired of it, calling it outdated. Players wanted their games to be fully 3D. And both Pyro and Spellbound listened. Sadly, this would also contribute to the downfall of the genre. In March 2006, Pyro released a sequel to the Commandos games called Commandos Strike Force, but it was a sequel in spirit only. They shifted perspective and turned it into a first-person shooter. It still featured 3 playable characters you could switch between, and there was an emphasis on stealth and tactics, but it wasn't a real-time tactics game anymore. The game received mixed reviews at the time, and it marked the end of the Commando series for that era. As a side note, I personally quite enjoyed this game when I first played it, especially the missions where you infiltrate German territory behind enemy lines. It was surprisingly non-linear, almost like the Hitman trilogy we have today. But despite a few bright spots, the mixed reception and poor sales left Pyro Studios in a tough spot. Afterwards, the studio made a racing game and eventually transitioned into the mobile market, before sadly closing down in 2017. So, with Pyro abandoning the genre, it was up to Spellbound to keep the torch lit. And they did. Just 1 month after Commandos Strike Force, they released Desperados II: Cooper's Revenge. But it wouldn't reach the same heights as the first title, far from it actually. While it retained the series' signature gameplay and made the leap into 3D, it also introduced a host of new problems. Some of that can be traced back to the fact that publisher Atari missed 6 months worth of payment to the studio, forcing Spellbound to lay off staff. Although the funding eventually came through from external sources, the project timeline remained unchanged. The result was a game with real potential that ultimately felt rushed and unpolished. The enemy AI was a far cry from the excellent systems in the original. Controlling your characters felt unresponsive and clunky, and there were constant pathfinding issues and bugs getting in the way. Enemy placement and numbers were poorly balanced, turning some levels into a real slog. The voice acting took a noticeable dip.
Well, I might as well make myself useful. I'll steal a horse.
And while the music was actually pretty good, there were only a few tracks, so it got repetitive fast. And the cutscenes, somehow they looked worse than the ones from the 2001 game. More like a slideshow than anything cinematic. Still, the atmosphere, the then underused Wild West setting, and the core gameplay kept Desperados II from being a total misfire. Fans of the original likely found some enjoyment here, but it certainly didn't win over many newcomers to the real-time tactics genre. And that brings us to the final real-time tactics game Spellbound ever worked on. A title that, at the time, also marked the end of the genre. This game was originally planned as an add-on for Desperados II, but after Atari missed their payment deadlines, the two companies agreed to part ways. Spellbound kept the rights to the assets they had already developed, but not the Desperados IP. So they rebranded the project and released it under a new name, Helldorado. And credit where credit's due, the game felt better to play, with fewer bugs, improved pathing and slightly smarter AI. It also introduced a new mechanic, the ability to combine actions. For example, attaching dynamite to an arrow, which added some fun new options. However, Helldorado only featured 4 maps, one of which was reused from Desperados II. It was clear this was originally meant to be an add-on. With only slight improvements and almost no marketing, the game quietly flew under the radar. Spellbound would go on to release a few more games, but none really made a splash. Reception was mixed, and by 2012 the studio shut its doors for good. And with that, the genre quietly faded away with Helldorado. I think the downfall came from a few key factors. Both Pyro and Spellbound struggled with the shift to 3D. The magic just didn't carry over. At the same time, console gaming was on the rise, and these slow, tactical experiences didn't translate well to a controller. Add to that tight deadlines, technical issues, and games that felt rushed or half-finished. Meanwhile, the broader real-time strategy genre was also in decline, with MOBAs taking over much of the space that traditional RTS games used to occupy. I believe there was still an audience for these kinds of games, but developers seemed more focused on chasing trends rather than refining what made the genre special. And so, real-time tactics was left in the dark, dormant for almost a decade. That would all change in 2016. My love for the genre hadn't faded one bit over those years. I'd still go back and replay the classics regularly. Then one day, while scrolling through YouTube, I came across a thumbnail of a game with an isometric perspective. I clicked on it out of curiosity. And the moment I saw that familiar view cone, I knew the genre was back. When I finally played it later that year, it was clear Shadow Tactics wasn't just a cheap attempt to recreate the RTT glory days. Developer Mimimi had taken the best elements from the first 2 Commandos games and Desperados and built something that felt fresh while staying true to the genre's roots. They even flew to Barcelona to meet Gonzo Suarez, the director of the original Commandos, to show him the game. After playing it, he gave his blessing, an endorsement that meant a lot to the team from Germany. Aside from the shift in setting to Edo period Japan, most of the tweaks Mimimi made to the formula were minimal, because the core pillars were already so strong. But there was one thing they knew they had to avoid. The classic Commando scenario, where you clear the entire map with the green beret and then the driver shows up at the end for his 10 seconds of glory, just to drive everyone off the map.
Finally, some action!
They addressed this by giving every character the ability to melee kill, carry bodies and distract enemies, each at their own pace. The one exception was Takuma, the sharpshooter, who leaned more into a support role. It made the game feel like a hybrid between Commandos 1 and 2, tighter squad dynamics with a more balanced design. At the same time, each character still had a signature ability that defined their role. These weren't just tools, they were expressions of the characters themselves. One of my favorite ways the game injects personality into its cast is through the dynamic music system. Each character has a unique instrument associated with them, and whenever you pull off a cool play, that instrument fades into the soundtrack as a new layer. For example, a quick drum roll when Mugen strikes, or a playful flute motif for Yuki.
You're quick with that knife.
Thank you, Sensei.
I told you, don't call me that.
Little musical signatures that reinforce their identity every time you use one of their abilities. It's really subtle, but so damn cool. They went a step further with the voice lines too. Select a character during a snow mission and they might comment on the cold.
Oh, cold feet.
Choose them after an intense story beat and they'll sound notably more serious.
It's not safe here.
It creates a sense of continuity between gameplay and narrative that most RTTs never even attempted. Mechanically, they pulled smartly from the classics. Visible footprints in the snow from Commandos, synchronized commands from Desperados, now called Shadow Mode, and the return of night maps. But they also added a lot more verticality with climbable rooftops and a grappling hook. This is a ninja game after all. One of the smartest additions was the slow motion effect when entering a view cone, giving you a split second to react and easing the pressure to constantly quick save and quick load. And finally, they added gamepad support, opening the door to console players. These final two additions, however, were seen as a downside by some hardcore fans of the genre. Catering to consoles, they argued, made the game slightly more forgiving. Others felt that some of the abilities had become a bit too one-dimensional. But that was a small subset of players. Most were incredibly impressed, veterans and newcomers alike, myself included. In the end, the game sold over 1 million units, and perhaps the best part, it put real-time tactics back on the map. Then came the waiting. What would be the next big entry in the genre? For a while, nothing really came along. That was until Gamescom 2018. The moment I saw the Western setting, one thought ran through my mind. Please be Desperados, please be Desperados. And then I saw Kate in the background.
Hey, darling.
That was it. My favorite game in this genre was finally getting a proper sequel, nearly 2 decades after its original release. To say I was excited would be an understatement. I don't usually pre-order games, but I had so much faith in Mimimi to do the series justice that I bought it the moment pre-orders went live. And the trailer, it brilliantly captured the genre's signature trial and error nature, showing off the cycle of quick saving and quick loading as you perfect each move. Desperados III turned out to be a fantastic game, one that showed tremendous respect for the source material. Just like they did with Shadow Tactics, Mimimi reached out to someone from the original Desperados team to exchange ideas and to get his blessing. That someone was Ralph Adam, who served as a producer and writer on the original game back in the day. And he was genuinely impressed with how Mimimi had brought the series back to life. Now, some people felt the game didn't innovate enough beyond Shadow Tactics, calling it a simple reskin. But here's the thing. Shadow Tactics was already heavily inspired by Desperados in the first place. Personally, I'm of the mindset, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Everything I mentioned in the Shadow Tactics section made its way into Desperados 3 in one form or another. But it's not like the team didn't innovate. For starters, the game looks gorgeous, with improved lighting, more detailed environments, and even motion captured performances. They also introduced civilian areas where the gang could walk openly through the streets, along with restricted zones that offered more creative entry points. On top of that, Desperados 3 added a fast forward button, which made tracking patrol routes a whole lot less tedious. And one of the coolest new features, a replay screen that shows the exact path you took through a level, along with which abilities you used. It's super satisfying. But even beyond that, there's a ton of extra content to dig into. Unique achievements with real replay value, bounty missions that remix enemies, heroes and abilities across existing maps, and 3 massive DLC missions on top of it all. For me, as a fan of the original, they nailed it. The game had just the right amount of fan service and callbacks, while still feeling fresh and modern. The design really struck a perfect balance between the old and the new. 3 characters returned from the original game, alongside 2 brand new ones. The returning cast even got a few nostalgic lines pulled straight from the first game, something I really appreciated.
Here goes. Here goes. Someone call for a doctor?
Did someone call for a doctor?
Enough dilly-dallying.
Enough dilly-dallying.
There was also a great tribute to one of the most iconic locations from the original, the Eagle's Nest, brought back in D3's final DLC. One of the best touches in that level was the subtle musical reference to the original soundtrack. The first few notes are nearly identical. Hats off to composer Filippo Pecos for that one. It's a surreal feeling when a game comes along that feels tailor-made for you. I could go on and on about it, but you get the point. Desperados 3 was everything I had hoped for. After Desperados III, other studios started to take a stab at the genre as well. We saw games like Partisans 1941 in 2020 and Warmongrels in 2021, both of which received positive reviews. Meanwhile, Mimimi released a DLC for Shadow Tactics called Aiko's Choice, which added 3 large missions to the game, building on the lessons learned from Desperados III. I loved this DLC as well. Then, following their announcement of the genre rebrand to stealth strategy, Mimimi released their next major game, Shadow Gambit: The Cursed Crew in 2023. But sadly, it would also be their final game. Shadow Gambit was a slightly more experimental game for the studio, featuring supernatural abilities, custom crew composition, non-linear missions, upgradable skills and a hub area between missions. I personally haven't played it yet, since I prefer my stealth strategy games more grounded. Not a big fan of the supernatural stuff. I do plan to give it a shot eventually though. That aside, the game was once again met with plenty of praise. Mimimi had delivered 3 critically acclaimed titles back to back, and yet the studio still had to shut down. Why was that the case? Mike Mahardy interviewed Mimimi's creative director Moritz Wagner about the studio's struggles, and I quote, "Everybody who played our games loved them. On Metacritic, on Steam, people love it, but a lot of people don't even try it, even if there's a free demo. It's too stealthy, it's too tactical, I can see vision cones. Maybe the old school class of stealth games ruined it for some people. You get detected, you fail. Sadly, I wish the modern open-ended kind of stealth was viable regardless, but I just don't think it is." We've been scraping very hard at the ceiling of our genre. One of the biggest goals with Shadow Gambit was to expand the audience. But we've been working within 2 niches basically. There's a lot of positivity, a lot of hype in a smaller group. The people who played our games, and that is great to see. I'm grateful for that. But of course you want more." End quote. If we look at the available sales numbers on Steam, we can see that each release sold significantly less than the last, while production costs kept going up. On top of that, the studio often struggled to secure funding for their projects, which made things increasingly stressful for the team. Personally, I'd be perfectly happy with games in this genre at the scale and production level of Shadow Tactics, if it meant studios like Mimimi could stay afloat. But sadly, that ship has sailed. With the 3 most prominent stealth strategy studios now shut down, what does the future hold for the genre? Well, it's hard to tell. We've seen other developers try their hand at it with varying results. But all these games have one thing in common: a low player count. Even Commandos Origins, the latest official entry in the Commandos franchise, didn't seem to break through, though I haven't played it myself yet. From what I've gathered, it's a solid game, but it doesn't quite reach the heights of the classics. What the genre really needs is another big hitter like Shadow Tactics, something that can punch through the ceiling and bring in a wider audience. There's one upcoming game that might just have the potential: Eric's Home: The Stolen Dream. I'm not entirely sure if it qualifies as a full-on stealth strategy game, but it shares a lot of the same design ideas. What really stands out is the production value and the strong focus on story. That's what makes me think it could have a shot. But of course, only time will tell. And then finally, there's the player-generated content. Both Desperados III and Shadow Gambit include simple modding tools, letting players create custom scenarios that can extend your playtime in those titles. Commandos 2 also has a massive mod called Destination Paris, featuring over 300 custom missions and contributions from over 50 creators. Then there's the Desperados Discord community, a passionate bunch. One user, Yeti Wizard, is even developing custom modding tools, and folks are still making new missions for a game that launched over 20 years ago. That kind of dedication really shows how much love there still is for this genre. They'd be thrilled for you to jump in, create and play new maps. The link to the Discord server is in the description down below. Also worth a mention, user Jack O'Hara has put together a comprehensive list of every real-time tactics game ever released, along with upcoming titles. A huge shout out to him. I've added his full game list to the sources document, which you'll find linked in the description as well. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. This one's been a long time coming, and I really hope I've done the genre justice. I know real-time tactics isn't the biggest genre out there, but it's got a dedicated and passionate community that's very much alive, and I'm proud to be a part of it. Thank you for sticking with me through this 30-minute video. If you've got thoughts to share, drop them in the comments. I read every single one. If you'd like to see more content like this, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And a huge shout out to my Patreons for their continued support. If you'd like to join them, you'll find the link in the description. Alright, that's all for now. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace!
It's been a pleasure, Marshal.